Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Keisha Dunstan, and I'm Director of Marketing Operations, and I'm excited to welcome you to our webinar, Actionable M&A Integration Practices to Accelerate Deal Value. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Grace Makeley. Grace?
Thank you, Keisha. Welcome, everyone. My name is Grace Makeley, and I'm the Operations Manager at E78 Partners. Thank you for joining us today. We have an exciting agenda lined up for you. We'll start with some logistics and introductions to set the stage. Next, we'll dive into integration value drivers and M&A. Following that, we'll discuss integration best practices and common mistakes. And finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A session and closing remarks. Let's get started here. Our session today will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by the Q&A segment. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions or share comments. While we have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, don't hesitate to send in your questions as they arise. At the end of the session, we're going to send out a survey, and we welcome your feedback to help us improve any future events that we have. Additionally, this webinar will be recorded and be shared with all event attendees. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Scott Whitaker to get started here. Scott?
Thank you, Grace. We'll introduce ourselves. We are with E78. Stefan and I both were co-founders of Global PMI Partners, GPMIP. I know some of you might know us from those days. We've been with E78 since December of last year. I live in Atlanta. I've been doing integration work now for almost 30 years, kind of hard to believe. The experience that we'll draw on today on the right there, I won't read all that, but lots of engagements, different kinds of engagements, sector experience. We're very passionate about the subject, written a few books, as you can see, and done a lot of thought leadership, articles, newsletters, things like this, because we want to share what we've learned with folks and make this easier for folks that are doing integrations and carve-outs or building playbooks, and pass that wisdom along. And so that's what we intend to do today. Stefan?
Yes, pleasure to meet you all on the call here today. I'm Stefan Hofmeyer, Managing Director out of Houston. As Scott mentioned, we've worked together for quite some time. And I think looking at August of this year, it'll be my 30-year mark as well. So it's crazy how time flies in the integration space. And so both Scott and I have a tremendous amount of experience from, IT integration, production facility integrations to, I think at one point I was making sausage in Bavaria. So we'll take all of that knowledge and share some best practices and actionable items for you here today.
Just a little bit about E78. We handle Office of the CFO, Office of the CIO services, business transformation. You can see the services across transaction advisory, finance and technology optimization, cost optimization, and then interim and executive search services below, and fund solutions. The part we're going to be deep diving today is in the green there, M&A integration planning and management. If there's other things that you see here that you'd like to follow up on, we can get questions at the end of this and certainly do that, but we'll be focused in the green for the rest of the session. All right, let's get into our webinar. So our intent today is to really share a lot of common sense best practices and a lot of lessons learned from our experience, which is derived from executing in hundreds of integrations, carve-outs, divestitures, dozens of sectors. I can't honestly think of one that we haven't worked in. Dealing with management teams that are experienced and those that are not, and helping each with the things that they need based on where they are in their particular integration or carve-out journey. Helping companies that are operationally mature, and those that are kind of bootstrapping it because they're growing so fast. Company size, all tiers, lower, middle, upper middle, even some micro cap stuff, public, private. transaction type, stock asset, distressed, other unique transactions, and very diverse company cultures and nationalities. We do a lot of cross-border work, so we're working in other parts of the globe. Bottom line, as far as what we're sharing today, it's common sense stuff. You're going to see a lot of things that you'll think, huh, yeah, I thought that was what you're supposed to do. But what we're doing is kind of stitching together all of the who, what, how, why, when details that really ensure integration success. There is no magic AI tool yet to spit out a beautiful integration plan. It's a million things done extremely well and in the right order and consistently. And that's kind of the kind of pragmatic stuff that we'll share today.
Yeah, and one other comment there too. As Scott mentioned, a lot of this is common sense, but there is a knowing versus doing gap. And when you're in a situation where it's pretty intense, you're either merging or acquiring another organization, whether you be a private equity operating partner, an executive, or being the hands-on integration manager, these things sometimes slip through the cracks. And it's really important to take advantage of these. And hopefully through this session, you'll have these top of mind when you do your next merger or acquisition. To follow that up, some key terms we wanted to represent here. In our world, we have a common vernacular, and we just wanted to go through those just really briefly before we get into the meat of our work. First of all, as an integration management officer, an IMO. As some of you, if you're not in the space, you may, it's very similar to a project management office or a PMO, but specifically set up for integration management, where work streams are report into that for statusing typically on a weekly basis. Then there is what we call a steerco, a steering committee, which then the IMO reports into, and that typically has a C-level representation, board level representation, and that's where strategy is defined, direction is defined, and any issues that bubble up that need to be addressed in the steerco. Combo Co. Here's some more codes for you. Combo Co, which is Acquire Co and Target Co. So acquiring company and target company, when they come together, it's Combo Co. In past lives, I've heard that as New Co as well, but that's the end state new business that is developed. And of course, end state, defining what that is, that's a fully operationalized integration where everything is together. Things are established based on the target operating model and working to plan. So sometimes that can happen pretty quickly. Sometimes it takes a bit of time if you've got longer term ERP implementations and such. And so those are the terms we wanted to cover here today. If you find out any other terms you're not aware of, just let us know, and we're happy to define those as well. I know we're all coming from different backgrounds.
Let's talk about integration value drivers in M&A. So every transaction is unique and has a value driver, and that ties to the deal thesis. Could be a commercial opportunity, synergies, geographic expansion. What makes the deal thesis come together? What we're talking about when we talk about value drivers in the integration setting are those that help deliver that deal thesis during the integration process. So it really boils down to a few things across the plan and execute spectrum. For planning, start early, efficient, and institute efficient governance to prepare for day one. We're going to talk about these in more detail in the following slides. Defining strategy, key work streams, the target operating model. A lot of times the acronym there is TOM. You might see that. Addressing communications, culture, and change across your stakeholder audiences. And then as we get into execution, focusing on the strategic work streams first. We'll talk about this, but these are the heavier lifts. Things that talent retention, IT integration, go-to-market alignment. Then we'll talk about rigorous post-close execution, getting the work done on time, accelerating where you can. And then Stefan will close with performing closed-loop integration issue management and tying things off. So let's get into these in more detail. So for each of these, we're going to talk about best practices and common mistakes. We'll start with the best practices. So let's talk about starting early and instituting efficient governance. Go ahead, Grace. So organization and execution is just critical and to running a good integration. It sounds intuitive. You'd be amazed how many folks try to wing it. Starting early, really important. Getting at least 30 days ahead of close. More if you can spare it. Every deal is different. Sometimes you have simultaneous sign close. Sometimes things are going through regulatory review. All that affects the timeline, but the common denominator is you want to give your people enough time to prepare for day one properly and get a planning cycle of integration completed, so that you're speeding value delivery when you get to execution. Stefan talked about the IMO and SteerCo. You want to formalize that. Sometimes the deal is small. Maybe you don't need a SteerCo. You can kind of combine those with the right people. Like I said, every deal is different. You don't need to over-engineer or make it too hierarchical if you don't need to, but you need some kind of structure. And then the weekly rhythm we'll talk about when we get to execution. Where does this kind of show in terms of value, Grace? So execution, discipline, and rigor. Empowerment of your leads. When we talk about acquire co and target co leads, those folks that you've selected to lead their respective functional work streams, finance, IT, sales. When they are, have a good process, a good governance beneath them, they can really make a lot of hay and get a lot done. And how those people gel, a lot of times, so goes the integration. So you get those early folks working together well, and a lot of good things can happen. And the most important thing, you compress your planning cycle. One of the pain points that we see if we're brought in after someone has tried a couple times and maybe has some bad experience with integration is that they felt like the planning cycle took too long. They got past close 30, 60 days in, still planning. Didn't feel like they were executing. We try to get a lot of the planning done by close, maybe even 80% of it. And it just speeds value delivery. Let's talk about some kind of watch outs and mistakes. The biggest one by far is underestimating the degree of integration expertise required. We work with a lot of folks that do incredible things in the business world. They, have created technology and enabled platforms that are incredible. They make things, precision instruments, other things. They ship things on time in all parts of the world, but they think that expertise translates to being able to do integration well, and it doesn't. Integration is a unique thing. We need their attention and discipline and work ethic and all that, of course, but it's not a like-to-like translation thing, and that's a common mistake people make. And then just prioritizing. There are things when you get into the deal thesis that are more important to take care of and obsess over than others. You want to make sure those are at the front of the list, and that's where you're spending a lot of your energy. Where you see value erode here is just planning and execution dysfunction. Biggest thing is just being an inability to address and resolve issues in a timely fashion, which perpetuate the planning cycle, create frustration among the leads, and ultimately delay your integration timetable. When you delay your integration timetable, you are going to delay your value delivery schedule, which is part of the deal thesis. You can count on it. So delayed integration, delayed value harvesting.
Yep. Very good,
All
Scott.
right.
One other thought I wanted to say there is when you're looking at governance, it's really about, someone asked me in passing, well, what does it mean to do all this stuff? And, if you're doing it right, there are two primary things. One is to increase clarity of action and reduce risk. If you had to put it in like a 2-sentence or a 1-sentence description, that's what governance helps do. And that's one piece of the ingredients that Scott will go through the rest of the presentation here today.
This is just a schematic of our particular process, but the point here is that there's a logic and progression to getting from the top left, which is, establishing your integration management office, the who, what are they responsible for, down to the bottom right, which is a finalized playbook and plan. And as you can see, you have to do things in the right order. Establish your governance, get your strategy. We'll talk about some of these other things more in the webinar. Get stuff organized down to the functional level. Then get detailed work plans on the right. A lot of people start on that far top right side. They start with checklists and lists. And the other stuff is just kind of comes together. Who things are assigned to is kind of loose. But starting on the far top right is a big mistake. Everyone can start with a list. That does not get you to the bottom right. And so that's a common mistake. But you can see the progression there. You have to go through this to get the level of rigor and plan detail that you need to report on it well, to have a robust plan of record with dates that are realistic, that you can count on, that people can get behind and drive. But you have to do these things in the right order. You have to allow yourself enough time to do it.
Yeah, it's got a good point on the top right. Obviously starting on the top left, the key aspect there, just to start off that first step, is to have a good handoff between the deal team and the integration team. Oftentimes those are not the same people. And if you do not have an understanding of the deal thesis and objectives and are able to drive that towards execution, you end up with something that's completely different than what the corporate development and the C-suite thought they were going to get out of the integration. So it's really important to follow that line of sight all the way through to integration.
Another part that you don't see on here is communications. We're going to talk about that, but obviously there's a similar process for getting everything that you need to do done for communications. Starts with getting the right people together, figuring out the message. How does that translate to each function? What needs to be covered? What is your logistics for day one to make sure everyone's getting a message in a coordinated fashion? That's a huge amount of work and another good reason that you have to start early. All right, let's talk about the next one, which is defining the strategy, work streams, and target operating models. So some best practices here. Think with the end in mind. So you need to translate the deal thesis, investment committee deck, investment memorandum, SIM, whatever you're using. Is a justification to do the transaction. What we do is we translate that into an integration planning brief, which is usually one page. There's an example in here we'll show in a moment. But that gets that translated into integration planning, and it serves like the North Star, and you have to distill that down. And that always takes quite a few cycles to do, because you're taking what is a financial model and you're turning it into kind of the stuff that has to get done during integration to deliver the value that's part of the deal thesis. You got to get your executive alignment around the target operating model. We see folks struggle here a lot, and it's not like it's easy. Sometimes it's quite intuitive. You're buying something, it's folding nicely under an existing BU. No big deal. Other times the target is organized quite differently than you. You have to figure out how it fits, where people go. Everyone has different titles. That requires a lot of work to get right. And you're not going to figure out at day one, but you have to have the plan to figure out and when it's going to be kind of live and effective, and maybe it goes in stages. But that's really important work. And then end state for processes and IT requirements. So you have infrastructure needs. Somebody, you might have A/B type decisions. They're on this, we're on this. What's best for us together? Maybe it's neither. What's your process and timeline and the expertise required to figure that out? Where you see value delivered when you do this right is just completing stuff in the right time and the right order. You're solving the big stuff and prioritizing that so you can cascade that direction down into more detailed functional planning. And you have your leads, who are busy already with their day jobs, by the way, focused on execution versus, again, an elongated planning cycle, because you're kind of pushing harder work out. So let's talk about some common mistakes. Unclear priorities and objectives. So, not prioritizing and the deal thesis and spending the time getting value drivers clarified. And so everyone kind of has to guess what's important, or what typically happens is they focus on what's important in their individual functional lane, which is versus what's important at the program level to deliver the deal thesis. And then program objectives not detailed to the functional level. If you really aren't defining it at the program level, very hard to get clarity at the functional level. And then the end is real easy, just frustration, and it just takes forever to get to end state because you have not clarified what end state is. So people are trying to kind of figure it out as they go, which just leads to a lot of frustration. Sometimes you get turnover in the IMO leads because they can't figure out, they want to do something else. And another big one is it really can delay and thwart cultural integration and alignment because you're kind of keeping your, as is states up longer than needed, and people aren't coming together on kind of what they look like, as combo co. And so they kind of stay in their camps, which is not what you want.
Yeah. And another item, Scott, it's fascinating that you kind of touched upon is, if people are motivated, they will lean in and try to, if they don't have an understanding what integration strategy is, if they're motivated, they'll lean in. If they're just trying to get their day job done, they'll continue just to do their day job as they did prior to acquisition. And so if any of you have been in a situation where you're at a company that's done an acquisition, the people are still doing what they did, 3 years ago, that's a symptom of not performing overall integration strategy right. And so we do see that sometimes when we'll come into clients with legacy acquisitions. So something to consider.
I think there's an artifact here next. This is when we talk about value drivers and objectives. This is just an example. It's been sanitized a bit, but just clarifying the deal thesis. So, this is a distillation of a big document, which is not suitable to send out to leads and help they figure things out. You have to do the work to distill that deal thesis down into value drivers. Why? What are the big things that have to get done? Then the representative objectives for integration. And by the way, these objectives that you see get blown out into all the functional work plans, which can turn into work streams and initiatives. This one page here might give, turn into, 500-600 things that need to get done in an integration or more. But this is your starting point. This is your North Star. You have to have this direction. You communicate it to the leads when you launch so they understand it. As you feather people into the IMO from the target, as they get involved, it's a good briefing for them on what's important so there's no confusion. It's one of the most useful documents in any integration.
All right,
Yeah.
let's talk about, oh, go ahead.
I said, Stefan.
Oh, yes. So let's talk about communication. So before we get started here, I wanted to give you just some anecdotal evidence of what I've experienced over the past decade and a half. 15 years ago or so, communication, culture, and change in many cases was secondary to integration work. So we'd go into clients. We could see that there is some really need there, and then we would try to incorporate the communications and change into an integration plan and execute that out. Now, in this day in 2024, we are seeing that both from a client and from our side of it, that communication, culture, and change is an absolute necessity in every integration that is completed. And so that's great as we establish that going forward. So as you look at your integrations, definitely consider these best practices. And so when you're talking about best practices, especially for day one communications, is understanding who those stakeholders are and stakeholder mapping. And that really, obviously is customers, but also very much internally to employees, also to suppliers and anybody else you can think of. Sometimes it's even public entities that you have to identify as stakeholders. And not only do you need to identify them, but establishing customized material for those individuals, and not just having one email, but having an overall approach that's consistent. Also, not only for day one, but also to follow up at post-close. Oftentimes people are very eager and motivated to get to day one, all the communication goes out and things go silent. And then, a week, a month, 2 months after that, folks are wondering, well, what's happened? Are we just doing what we need to do, or is there more information that's coming out? So having that followed up and really have a communication plan for the year is also important. And then also to consider culture and change. Now, I've done a lot of work with culture and change over the years, and it's not like you're developing a plan to change culture, right? But when you talk about culture, it's really important to observe what the culture is. For instance, with cultural due diligence or cultural planning, and understanding what the target co and the acquirer co have, and how they are different. And so when you understand that, then you can incorporate needed changes to your integration plans to make sure that you identify and mitigate any gaps within the culture of the two entities. So from a resulting value creation, there's a balance here, right? The first thing you want to do, absolutely, and if you're not aware, when a company gets acquired, typically there is an immediate loss of value, right? Because you think people are wondering where they're doing and what's going on. So the key thing for you to do as part of integration planning is to have business as usual preservation. And so that's enabling folks to do their jobs, do it as they were doing it before close, and continue on without any missteps. But at the same time, it's also, and of course that deals with engagement and productivity, but at the same time, you want to also communicate mission, and establishing that mission in your communication plans and vision and values is really important, because not only are they continuing to work as they did before, but now they see something that may be more aspirational to them. And so that's really important, not only for customer retention, but also for employee retention, and also establishes some good cultural integration effectiveness. And so that's really important from the value creation side. So let's look at the negatives of that. So taking a look at the negatives, downplaying the need for communication back a decade or two ago, and having specialized communications can be fraught with some really ugly things that don't necessarily, it seemed like easy at the beginning not to really focus on this, and let's have the HR do all the communications, or let's have our sales folks just do the communications. There's some things that come out of it that are important, and we can shift over here to the value erosion. Poor comms really has several factors that can really destroy value outside of what I talked about of people wondering what to do. The employees, if they're not communicated to very clearly, they will automatically assume the worst case scenario. There's nothing that's going out about my team or business unit. I don't see an org chart. Maybe I'm being let go. Next thing they do is they go on the computer, they look for a job, they get a great job offer, and they're gone even before you thought about, how to entice him to stay longer. So there's attrition, both customer attrition as well as employee attrition can be a very difficult thing to deal with. So it's important to have that communication up front, be ready to go. And oh, by the way, it's also a reflection of your business, because this is their first impression. If you're the acquire code, this is their first impression of how they see you. If they see you as, hey, these guys have got their act together, it's well planned out, it's well communicated, I know where I fit, I'm on board, they are going to go, they're going to try to duplicate that into their work. If they see folks that are not doing so well all over the board, they may have less of pressure to execute to their full potential. So those are some really important things when you talk about communication, culture, and change within the organization. So I can move on here to the next slide here, Grace. So to take a look at that, and I want, let me go through this. Now I'll give you an anecdotal example. So the 6 tips, clearly define the terms and concepts of what's going on. Again, that goes to the clarity that I talked about earlier. Provide thorough explanations. So don't just say, hey, we're doing this. Well, why are you doing that? What does it mean to me? And how does that all work? Having that knowledge empowers employees in a way. Use examples that are active to them or applicable to them. Visual aids are also very important. And encourage questions, right? The idea that you, as an acquiring company or acquiring executive team, show a little vulnerability shows that you have confidence in what you're doing. And having them answer or ask questions and having you answer them in writing is also a very important thing to do. And oh, by the way, that all needs to be pre-planned ahead of time with consistent answers, with consistent talking points. But if you have that in order, you're off to the races with your new team. The one anecdotal experience that I've had that I want to share with you is I thought a really important one that really stuck out in my career is we were pulled into a deal with communications. We were pulled in late. So there was a town hall. They're announcing the acquisition to the acquired company. They said, come see this, and then you can help plan afterwards. So I got pulled into that. And the presentation was all about, hey, you know what? This company is going to do great things. We're going to grow, internationally. We're going to double, triple our business. And the CEO who was speaking said, "Oh, this is going to be great. I really look forward to this position and whatnot." What they completely forgot, and what we would have trained them to do, is to talk about the different lenses people view the acquisition from. So, for instance, I looked at the audience and I saw everybody with kind of frowns on their faces. That's like, well, what does this mean to me? Right? Am I going to keep my job, as I mentioned earlier? What happens to my 401k? What are my benefits going to be like? Am I going to be reporting to a new boss that I know nothing about? I like the current one I have. All of these things come out within the communication leads, and having an understanding of that lens and the empathy of the other people that are going through the integration process is really important. And they will, if you understand that and you execute that in your communications, they will see the importance you bring to them, and they will be more stickier within your business and be higher performance as well. So I know that there was a lot to take, but I wanted to go over that because I think it's a really important piece of it that we've seen in almost every integration that we do. So I guess we can move on here, Scott. I think back to you.
Yeah, so let's talk about strategic work streams. We hit on this a little bit earlier, but solving the big things first. So, job one, get that brief that we looked at figured out. That'll drive a lot of that resolution and clarity. The hardest lifts are always target operating model, go to market, how you're going to the market together. The product roadmap, there may be two platforms, maybe an A/B decision, you're retiring one, you're merging them. The go forward tech infrastructure. These are big moves that need analysis. They need the right people in the room to figure out what's best. There needs to be some clarity on what you look like together and the requirements that the business and the platform are going to need. They take time to figure out. The important thing is to map out that the process of figuring out and when that direction is going to be ready, because that will drive dependencies and a lot of the downstream work, stuff that you can't start until some of this stuff is figured out. So getting it tabled early and getting that timeline built is critical. So in terms of the value creation is the strategic alignment for ComboCo. It drives everything else downstream. Will accelerate the planning cycle and value realization. All of this, when you summarize it and wrap it up, that acceleration of the planning cycle always accelerates value realization 99% of the time, and that's what we're talking about today. So how are you using integration to accelerate value capture? By compressing the planning cycle and doing a lot of this stuff, which sounds kind of mundane and obvious and common sense, but getting it done and getting it done with the right people in the right order is the trick. All right, let's talk about mistakes. Delegating and postponing decisions. Yeah, I get really frustrated with steercos sometimes, and we'll have to go to the mat as they're kind of pushing hard decisions out. I need more information, or I have to wait till we have the new COO. It's all good, kind of interesting excuses, but it doesn't mean you don't have the people to kind of make some progress on them. So the more you punt them late into the planning cycle, the more you're going to have things happen like just frustrating leads, delaying the value resolution timetable, and some of the other value erosion things that you see on the right there. Grace, you can pull it up. Yeah, just delayed synergy value realization. The other thing is it will really cause a lot of friction with your leads. They're trying to figure this out. They don't have the tools and a lot of times the authority to do so. And you're really putting them in a bad position, frankly. Because it's a management's job to figure that out with their help. You push it down, they're trying to make decisions on platforms and things where, hey, they're going to go with what they know. Well, that's hard to get those folks to kind of come to a resolution. Next. So post-close execution. we always recommend that you keep the weekly rhythm, which we define as, we're meeting as the Steerco at Tuesdays at 10. Our IMO meets at Wednesdays at noon. Every function meets at this day and this time during the week. That's a weekly rhythm. You kind of step and repeat to get things done. You should keep that up through day 90 at least. For larger integrations that we do, public companies, things that are in the upper tier of the market, that integration timetable elongates for sure. But in the lower middle market, speed works to your advantage. You should get a lot of this work done by day 90, frankly. And so if you can do that, that makes a lot of difference. In terms of value capture, the continuity of the functional leads helps the combined organization come together, and just helps you create a high performing team. As I mentioned, as that IMO team comes together, so do the companies most of the time, and so does the integration. Common mistakes: lack of process consistency. If you hear anything when people talk about their bad integration experience, it was kind of catch as catch can on meetings. I didn't know when we were going to meet. One week we would have an IMO, the next week we didn't. I never knew what time it was. People would send delegates, so we really didn't have the right folks in the room to make decisions, and it just perpetuates the cycle. And so that lack of not trusting the process to help you get it done, and not having process consistency is one of the biggest mistakes. Value erosion is just kind of the never-ending integration. We didn't really know when it was done because we didn't have this kind of discipline in putting our plan together. There were a lot of issues that went unresolved, and so we really couldn't get a lot of this work done, and which resulted in kind of delayed value capture. And by the way, when you do it that way, you're never going to get good at it. And so a lot of the companies that we work with, inorganic growth is part of the strategy. If you can't get somewhat good at integration, that's just going to be a handicap every time that you're doing it. So when you're doing it this way, you're delaying the ability to make that an internal competency that you can lean on to get better at it. This is just an example of a plan of record. These are key milestones by function. In this case, you can see how they break along a year. This probably represents 15% of the work if you rolled up all the work plans in the project plan. So think of the milestones as the this is done date, and below that there may be 10, 20 things that culminate in that getting done. So this is representative of a ton of other things that need to get done. But you have to have a plan of record like this, and each week you're moving that line left or right to confirm whether you're making progress or not. And as things go to yellow because you're missing the date, who else does it affect? Why? How can you catch it up? Things that slip can a lot of times delay value capture and delivery. All right, Stefan.
All right, so back to me on integration management. So when you look at closed loop integration management, the one thing I wanted to mention early on is that in large strategic corporates, sometimes you can have a little bit too much overhead in project management where everybody's meeting all the time. Obviously, we deal a lot with strategic corporates, but also with private equity, and there's not time for that. Everything is very focused and important. And so these best practices, whether it be private equity-backed business or strategic corporate, public company, it's really important to drive these home. And that is to ensure when you're looking at some closed loop management, ensure each deliverable has a customer. This seems pretty basic, but the idea is that's an internal customer. So if you're developing things and it's not being measured and action's not taken based off of what your deliverable is, when you're doing integration management, kill it, right? Just get rid of it and find out what works. And that goes with actually the third bullet down. There's intentional actions to complete or not complete an activity. Do not let, and Scott mentioned this earlier about keeping consistent meetings and such. As you meet, keep that consistent activity because, or if it doesn't work, intentionally kill it, right? And that intentional action will help out. So things that do drive value are things, such as synergy management, synergy attainment, tracking dependencies, tracking issues, focusing on those items that are managing by exception, right? So that's really the key here. So the resulting value creation is, of course, managing the management that's of value. You're achieving your synergies through ensuring that not only did you plan for that up front, dealing with the deal team, putting that in your tasks, driving those synergies, recording those synergies and achieving those synergies. But if there's any issues, maybe something's coming in lower, going back closed loop wise and adjusting your plan to try to further optimize the synergy as you manage. So those are some key things, that clarity of activity to complete, and addressing any decisions or delays. Common mistakes. Again, rewarding passive resistance is one thing. So for instance, oftentimes we have to train people up that this is important stuff. So it may be that someone's not filling out their work plan correctly, making sure that that gets done on a timely manner. So that sets the example for others to follow. But having meetings that if they're not 15 minutes long, if they can be, not taking up the full hour just because you can, not having everybody, giving them time to speak just because they're on the integration team, but focusing again on those management by exceptions and making sure that deadlines are met. And if they're not met, coming together with an actionable plan so they don't get pushed out further the next meeting that you have. Those are the common mistakes, just letting things kind of slowly slide and not getting things done. And as a result of that, if you do those mistakes, of course, time spent in meetings versus completing the actual integration work, which is the important thing. Tasks, fading away and not being done. People think they're done, but just out of sight, out of mind, and nothing gets accomplished, i.e. the synergies don't get accomplished. And then legacy processes at the end of the day still being in place when you want to transition to something new. And as part of this, I did want to address a question that I saw in the Q&A. Who's the best people to choose for an IMO lead? And that's quite simple. It's someone with a project management background where they start things, they finish things, they plan and they execute against dependencies and they manage risks. There's some really bright people that don't have that project management mindset. So if they're PMP certified, if they have the project management mindset, typically they're in the IT world, they're really good at that. Those are the folks that are great at being integration managers if you want to promote them up to that level. And so I just wanted to address one of the questions that we have here as well. I think there's another one on technology platforms. We can address that here at the end of our presentation. Scott, I think, I have another example here. This is a simple example going back to tangible things to take a look at. Here's a template. It shows, the work streams that were worked on. This is an example of a client that we had. And, it was more driven, dollar driven by month. How are things going? And actually having that in a visual space. So you could address things that are going well, adjust for things that are going in the red. And so this is one example. Another example would be a synergy tracker. Another example we use a lot is a charter for each business function, where it's like, how do you define what complete is and what are your objectives for your function, say sales, marketing, finance, HRIT, then having that and making sure you're tracking to that as well. So these are the physical tracking tools that you can use to make things clear to people. Again, driving clarity, reducing risk.
Yeah, and these were the success metrics and how we were tracking in this particular integration. The point is, there are KPIs for any integration that need to be defined and tracked. And a lot of times, some of the defining it is difficult. How you're going to track it, because you may have to pull data out of two systems. But you have to figure that out to figure out whether you're moving the needle on things that are important in terms of delivering the deal thesis. So, you can look at any integration, and the first question should be, show me how you're tracking progress, and tracking kind of priorities and KPIs, and that'll tell you a lot about how things are going. All right, we'll wrap and then we'll get into any Q&A. I think maybe one of your takeaways is integration is hard, but we always say it doesn't need to be. If you acknowledge and are honest about your organization's acumen, experience, and capacity up front, you're going to find the help to do it or make the adjustments to be able to do it well. The C-suite is so important for setting the tone from the top, as they say, for planning and execution, discipline and rigor. When they're signaling and communicating and reinforcing that these things are important. The integration discipline is important. Hitting these goals are important. They get done. When they're kind of off to the next thing, or integration is kind of a mild passing concern, the leads will pick up on that. You'll kind of be fighting uphill. Never discount the importance of communication. It's an easy thing to do really well, and when you don't do it well, it sends a negative message to all stakeholders, especially the acquired employees you're trying to keep engaged and positive. And it's something that you're going to chase and try to fix when you could have, with twice the amount of energy, when you could have used half that energy and just done it really well the first time. Watch your employees. Are you identifying the folks that you really need through some kind of assessment, proactive retention? That's A. And then B, are you doing the things we talked about today to make sure the folks that you are acquiring feel positive about things and are onboarded properly? Because when they start leaving, your customers will leave next. That's kind of an old fast rule. So make the onboard experience positive. Again, that's an easy thing to do really well. Don't underestimate culture and change. Sometimes culture is not a big deal. You may be, the two companies are very much alike, see the world the same way, the kind of rank and file very similar. It's maybe some fine tuning here and there. Other times, especially if you were once competitors, you measure performance differently. The way you go to market is very different. I mean, you have to pay attention to those things and decide, what you really want to address and how you're going to do that. And then as people get into new roles, they're going to be, adopting new systems, new way of doing things, new processes. Make sure you give the change support so they can do it well. We've talked about this again several times today. Do the hard work first. Make sure you have alignment and resolution on that. It will save you time in the downstream work. And look at it as a core competency you want to get better at. If you want to get, be able to master integration, do it more. If your inorganic growth is part of your growth strategy, like you're going to get better at product development or this or that, treat integration that way, not as a one-off exercise. Last, this old rule it comes true every time we do this, and that is discipline, consistent, persistent actions are more of a determining factor for integration success than anything else. Frankly, folks, it's a lot of boring stuff done week after week in the right order by the right folks with a kind of engine behind it to make sure that you're taking ground each week. It is not rocket science. And shouldn't be, but it's a lot of work to do, and it needs to be done, in a timely fashion. So, Akisha, I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, looks like we have some questions here.
We do have some questions that just popped up. So one of them, you addressed the integration team. How about identifying that integration champion day one within acquired company?
Yeah, usually that person is already on the IMO. They may be a lead on the side of the target co, and so they've been involved. And part of your stakeholder assessment and your stakeholder mapping should be identifying the right people in the organization to deliver the messages to the right audience. And so it may not be one person; it may be several people.
Yep. Yeah, and a couple of additions to that as well. It's really important, say at the kickoff of the integration management office or kickoff of the integration meetings, to have a very senior level person involved. CFO, CEO, head of corp dev, something along those lines, that are taking true ownership of the integration. If we don't see that, that's a bit of a warning sign if they push everything down and they're gone off to the next deal. And so it's really important. And then secondly, too, having people, when we do integrations, we support that, but having other people do the integrations and doing well what we train them on and educate them on, them doing it well is a key steward and sponsor. It's not us saying what to do. It's the internal teams that are delivering it. So as Scott mentioned, there's a lot of people involved that make a difference in that area.
Awesome. Another question is really like concept of communication, culture, and change. What are your thoughts around starting this conversation during due diligence so no downstream integration surprises?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of times we'll recommend that there's two ways on communications you have to do as part of day one planning. You have to start it early. That's kind of a foregone conclusion. Culture, the things that you can do is some culture diligence. You can do some qualitative with folks that are in the know. You get an understanding of where you're different, where you're alike, where the likely friction points. Then after close, and usually we recommend that you do this, after day 30 or 45, you can do a broader culture survey, kind of reinforce what you've learned. For change, the way we handle that is in our work plans, we'll actually designate, for work streams and initiatives, change impacts. So, what is the change? Who's going to be involved? What are the dependencies? And so you can start to get a feel for that and make sure that the right integration work is included, when there's got to be some training, when there's got to be this or that for a particular initiative, that the change management initiatives are built into the work plans and not an afterthought.
Okay. Another question. First, is it possible to get a copy of the deck? Yes, this recording will be shared to everyone that has attended. And then on top of that, also, how do you adjust your approach for small companies? For example, integrating companies of 1 to 3 million EBITDA each.
Yeah, so our process is designed to scale up and down, and you certainly and it's lean to begin with, and you certainly don't want to over-engineer for kind of a low, very modest little lower middle market deal. It's the principle of everything you need, but nothing that you don't. So you'll scale down things like, let's take communications for example. It may be just minimum effective dose. An employee letter, customer letter. Some follow-up. Maybe you don't need a big employee resource guide or a culture survey. And so we'll just kind of flick off the things that, really aren't necessary at this scale and just do the things that are absolutely critical to just getting the basic integration and communication planning done and executed.
Awesome. 2 more questions. Is it better to delay integration when they are earn out payments based on certain metrics?
Yeah, earnouts is always an interesting dynamic. We've had good luck with that. So you get some resistance sometimes because folks don't want to change things that might impact the business, and we understand that. And what you need to do is work to isolate those things that are truly may have material impacts on kind of current state and earnout dynamics, and do all the rest. And what you'll find if you're doing the hard work to kind of get that list down to just those things that, hey, we can't touch this, and these are sensitive, you'll find that maybe that's 10 out of the 90, 100 things that you have to do. But you got to work to get that list down, because the bias is going to be don't touch anything. And you have to get people off that and say there's a lot of work that we can do, and we can protect these things that may have material impact on your earnout, and let those be.
Awesome. And then final question, how would you incorporate social media in your communications plan?
It's just part of the our communications leads would understand the social media channels, and every communication plan has accommodations for all of your social channels, social needs, social audiences, etc.
Yeah. And to add to that, and I think there was another question earlier on that we can address too at the top of the list. But as far as social media goes, having a very precise plan and how that works. So for instance, I'll give you an example. If you've got a team that you're acquiring and they have LinkedIn presence, like instruct how to change the LinkedIn profile, for instance, or what to put there, and having that directly stated as to what to do versus having people just to kind of change it on their own is important to keep that consistency. But of course, related to social media or whatnot, obviously coming from corporate, say X account or LinkedIn, and having saying, hey, please repost this, that sort of stuff can all be part of the integration plan. And as far as I think the last question we have there on the technology goes, I think the really key question for technology and how we do business and how it should be done is that the integration management, the integration technology is there to support the integration into getting to end state, right? And so what we use, for instance, obviously proprietary templates developed in Microsoft Office products and SharePoint and stuff, but we also use a tool called Smartsheet. And we've configured that over the years, over many years, since 2016. We've configured that tool to establish automated reporting and other areas that provide enough project management complexity to get it done really well, but keeping it at a very subtle level where if you're not a project manager and say you're head of the sales work stream, you can still use that as a management tool and it's not confusing. So the key thing is to keep that as light as touch as possible, but effective as possible. So again, Microsoft products, Smartsheet is a really good tool, and then let it roll. We typically don't use productized tools, at least at this point, although for larger companies and organizations, those do come into play as well.
Awesome. And that was the final question, Stefan. So thank you all so much for joining our webinar today. It was definitely a great one. Looking forward to sending over today, as Grace mentioned, you will receive a survey following this. So please provide your feedback and we will definitely be sharing the recording of this webinar the minute it's available. So again, thank you all so much and have a fantastic day.